My name's Nino Cara. I'm the founder of Electric Autonomy, the organizers of the event. And I was honored just last week to be up at the Honda Canada plant in Alliston to hear the news of an enormous announcement in EV manufacturing and related supply chain investments of $15 billion by Honda into the Ontario marketplace. This is a generational investment and a huge sign of confidence in the EV transition and also in the Canadian and Ontario society, workforce, and a great positive move for the future here in Canada. And so it's been a very news-filled period since that announcement was made, and we're delighted that in his first public remarks since that announcement, I'm very delighted to welcome to the stage, to make an address, and then after he's spoken a few words, to meet with our moderator and executive editor, Emma Jarratt, for a Q&A. I'd now like to welcome to the stage Marc Leclerc, President and CEO of Honda Canada.
Thanks for the intro. Thank you, Nino. I'm very happy to be here with you today at the EV and Charging Expo, and I would like to thank Electric Autonomy for the invitation again this year. Now, I'm hoping that most every one of you in this room have heard about the EV value chain investment Honda Canada announced last week. We are very proud to make such a strong, historic commitment to the Canadian automotive sector. But let me begin by providing a summary of what our plans include, and then I'll spend some time talking about why we are making these investments and what needs to happen next. Now, Honda was the first Japanese automaker to invest in manufacturing in Canada. Our plant opened in 1986 with 350 associates. Today we have more than 4,200 associates in Alliston, and our 10th million vehicle recently rolled off the line. Two of our most popular models and fuel-efficient vehicles are made here. We have the CR-V and the CR-V hybrid variants, and the Civic, and soon to come, the Civic Hybrid later on this spring. But the world is changing, and it's changing very rapidly. A key focus for companies around the world, not just ours, is achieving carbon neutrality to sustain the global environment. At Honda, it's what we call our triple action to zero strategy, comprised of zero emissions from our vehicles in all of our operations, 100% use of carbon-free energy, and 100% use of sustainable materials. Honda set those global environmental tactics and strategies, and is making steady progress to ensure battery electric vehicle and fuel cell electric vehicles represent 100% of our sales by 2040. Now, a major step toward that goal was announced last week, with the largest ever investment in the Canadian automotive industry. Honda will invest $15 billion to create a vertically integrated and comprehensive EV value chain right here in Canada. This will include all aspects of EV production, from raw materials to the refinement of these materials and production of critical battery components, to the production of batteries, and finally leading to the production of finished EVs. As part of this investment, we will build 4 all-new plants. An environmentally responsible EV plant to begin production in 2028. And this plant will have an annual capacity of 240,000 EVs. We also will have an EV battery plant with annual capacity of 36 gigawatt hours. A cathode material plant and precursor facility plant in a joint venture with POSCO Future M, and a separator plant in a joint venture with Asahi Kasei. Not only does this represent the largest investment in Canadian automotive history, it is also Honda's largest investment in North America. And since our announcement, I've been asked 3 questions more than any others. Why Canada? Why a comprehensive EV value chain? And why now? So the answer to all these questions is really about the relationship between environmental responsibility, efficiency, and affordability. Let me start with the first two questions. Why Canada, and why a comprehensive EV value chain? Now, while Canadians don't always see our country as a key player on the global stage, Canada is, in fact, strongly positioned to play a leading role in the electrification transition, considering the supply chain ecosystem that exists in this country. We are rich in natural resources. The use of clean energy is actively promoted here. We have a highly skilled and diverse workforce. We have proximity and access to the largest global market. And we have governments with environmental objectives that are aligned with ours and willing to support the investments designed to achieve them. And finally, closer to home, we have associates at our award-winning plants in Alliston with a long-standing, proven track record of excellence, building award-winning vehicles. The investment in Canada allows us to leverage all these advantages and bring all the pieces of this value chain close together to create those efficiencies that would otherwise not exist if the network was more dispersed. It will bring us closer to the source materials and technologies involved and allow us to better orchestrate the entire value chain to ensure stable supply, strengthen cost competitiveness, gain priority in utilizing technologies involved in battery and EV production, and ensure the entire value chain is established and operating in an environmentally responsible manner. And on that last point, I will add that if we are not striving to produce batteries and EVs with that objective in mind, what are we really achieving when it comes to looking at the environmental sustainability in a holistic manner? In addition to this announcement mentioned that we are also working to include additional pieces of our Canadian value chain in the future. Raw materials procurement on the upstream has yet to be finalized, and on the downstream component, the repurposing and recycling of EV batteries to increase their economic value and achieve the realization of our carbon neutral objective remain to be developed. When all this is added up, the efficiencies gained from this unique approach won't just help us reach carbon neutrality and manage our costs, they will also strongly contribute to making EVs more affordable for consumers. And I think we can all agree that addressing the affordability issue is one of the most important factors that the EV ecosystem will have to tackle as we move toward 2030 and beyond. The other question that comes up a lot is, why now? Now, there's some irony in this question, I must say, because for the last few years, Honda has been answering questions about its more measured approach to electrification, about being labeled a laggard, and whether it was possible for us to catch up and compete with some of our competitors who had made earlier commitments. And now the script seemingly has flipped. Reports of a slowdown in EV sales and consideration are causing pundits to ask, why now, to make such a sizable investment in electrification in Canada? The simple answer is that EVs are the future. This investment is not about addressing demand today, but rather about where we see demanding involvement in 2028 and beyond. But while we have our eyes firmly on the future, until then, there's a lot of work to do across the entire EV ecosystem to create the right conditions for mass adoption to comply with the federal electric availability standard, what we commonly know as the ZEV mandate. Frankly, availability and choice of EV models are no longer the issue. EV models that will be introduced to the market will more than double in the years to come. The fact of the matter is that affordability, charging infrastructure solutions, range anxiety are all connected with the slowdown being currently experienced. Their issues must be addressed with urgency if this trend is to be reversed, to motivate the next wave of Canadians to make that transition. Let me end with some thoughts on what I think the electrification ecosystem's priorities should be to make sure that our industry will thrive and for Canada to be successful in achieving its climate goals. First, we need to consolidate efforts and commitment by all critical ecosystem stakeholders to build the required electrification support infrastructure. Federal, provincial, and municipal governments, charging infrastructure providers, and utility companies must all come together to develop the required charging infrastructure and grid capacity to support the speed of mandated EV adoption. Second, we must invest in consumer education and advocate for government purchase incentives to remain in place until such time as price parity with ICE vehicles can be achieved so that Canadians can make that transition. The industry is moving toward that goal, but it will take time. And finally, government support for Canadian automotive manufacturing and supply chain partners must continue through this transition to ensure we remain competitive and attract investments so that we can all remain key contributors to the electrification revolution and to the Canadian economy. Thank you.
Jean-Marc, it's great to see you here. I was up at the Honda Alliston plant last week during the announcement, and if I didn't know I was there for an EV battery and EV supply chain announcement, I would have thought I had accidentally wandered onto the set of a Colgate commercial or something. The smiles were ear to ear. It was just a wall of big smiles. So obviously $18 billion is huge by any standard. Honda wouldn't make this investment if they didn't have reasonable confidence in the future of zero-emission vehicles. So could you speak, please, to the trends that Honda is anticipating for the North American EV market?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned in my remarks, I think there is confidence, obviously, long-term. EVs are the solution to what we call light vehicles, as opposed to, for example, shipping and long-haul, transport. So we have confidence that this will evolve over time. The issue for us is really, it's the time frame that a lot of things need to come together, and whether or not these things are possible, because in the industry we can build them, but there's a lot of things in the ecosystem we don't control fully. And those are the things that we rely on to make sure that we're successful, and also that the government is able to achieve their, the objective of their EV mandate. So. But it is a long-term solution, full stop, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. As I said, we're looking at 2028 and beyond, and again, recognizing there's a lot of work to do to sell those 240,000 units that will come out of the plant, but we're confident that things will come together. And I think having the EV Expo, Charging Expo as you have here is one of those things that I love to see, because obviously it demonstrates how quickly things are moving, and so that we get the capacity available to us to sell these units comfortably and people wanting to buy them.
Absolutely. And the supply chain implications that Honda and then this investment will have in Canada are going to be significant. I mean, 240,000 vehicles is nothing to sniff at, 36 gigawatt hours of battery power. But is there going to be a relationship cross-border between what Honda Canada is doing and what Honda in the US is doing with the EV supply chain?
Yeah. Well, again, we have an EV hub, what we call in Ohio. The focus of that EV hub is flexibility. We are retooling existing plants. Retooling existing plants doesn't really achieve the efficiencies you need to significantly reduce the cost that connects to affordability. So it's all about, these plants will be able to produce battery electric vehicles, hybrids, and internal combustion engines. As you can well imagine, the political climate dictates that you need to build flexibility in your supply chain and your production. In Canada, this is basically going to be purpose-built production facility with the latest technology that will allow us to the efficiencies to reduce the cost of building the EVs, and of course the same goes for battery. This is going to be the first plant that will use Honda's unique battery technology. So it's everything in Canada is basically from the ground up all new. And what that means also is, for a change, sometimes we always benefit from what the US brings to Canada. Now what we're going to build here is going to benefit not only the US but Honda in other parts of the world. So it's huge news for us, not just from an investment perspective, but again, taking the lead when it comes to, for Honda, taking the lead on that front.
And so the supply, like, the Honda plan is, from a manufacturing perspective, almost totally self-contained, which is really interesting. But you will need suppliers from the upstream. So can you share a little bit about maybe some tentative plans there around the intentions to get either directly involved in mining or build partnerships with miners and refiners?
Well, let me start with the two partnerships that we announced. So one was for the CAM and PCAM with POSCO Future M that I mentioned. That's a critical element, obviously, of battery manufacturing, not just having it close to where batteries are going to be manufactured, but the chemistry is extremely important relative to the durability and recyclability of battery materials later on, because again, we want to make sure that everything is, from a downstream perspective, optimal, right? And as Saika say, is with the separators. Again, separators are a very important component of the battery. And again, having them close to where the batteries are being built, I mean, there's a lot of advantages. We're working with them on a joint partnership basis on those technologies that are going to continue to evolve, but also from a cost competitiveness perspective, having close to the plant, huge advantages to doing that. But you mentioned mining. I mean, those are some of the things that we're currently working on. As I mentioned, Canada, abundance of raw materials. So we're into a lot of discussions, nothing that I can share with you today, but critically this is very important component of, again, what we want to bring together. And finally, the piece, again, that we didn't touch on to any great degree last week was recycling. And again, this is something that we're going to start working on. It's not an urgency for us right now because we're talking something that is going to come into play a little later on, but again, our objective is to make sure that everything we do from a carbon neutrality perspective, is part of all the process and all the joint ventures we work with. That's what we want to achieve. So recyclability, and again, recycling also speaks to repurposing the battery, right, for energy storage, and also at the very end of life, again, how do we dismantle the battery, reuse some of the components into battery manufacturing again, so that we are sending nothing to waste landfills. So,
yeah, that urban mining concept is really interesting.
Right.
In terms of timelines for securing, the supplier partnerships with the critical minerals, do you have a sense of what those are for anyone in the room who's interested?
Yeah, I can tell you with the separator and CAM, PCAM, we're going to use the next 6 months to evaluate, the scope, how much investment we need to make. Again, we're asking companies from other countries to partner with us and come to Canada, so it has its own challenges, but the commitment is certainly there. And so I think from that perspective, the next 6 months will solidify a lot of the questions that I received last week about number of employment that are tied to those two suppliers. On the mining front, obviously, is it an open field mining, or is it something that currently exists? Clearly, if we're going to start producing in 2028, it's going to have to be from existing source. But we have a view long-term to mining in terms of making sure that we have that procurement, if you will, and the kind of relationships we're going to have, whether it's going to be a stake that we take in those mining companies, which is the desired, I think, approach, because if you think back of the microchip situation that the industry went through that caused a lot of disruption, we had supply agreements with those suppliers, but they ended up not supplying them because of different pressures globally. So we want to avoid that in the purview of the battery manufacturing and battery availability, if you will, moving forward, because that would have a pretty serious impact on our business.
So is it correct to kind of infer from that Honda's contemplating at least a more vertical integration?
Absolutely.
Yeah, to have that full control?
Yes, it is.
And then on the recycling side, that's going to be a post-2028 issue? Or
but I mean, all this determination is going to be determined, in a year to come. But yes, when it's going to start impacting, I think it's going to be post-2028, for sure.
And you mentioned that you're trying to bring companies over here to do these joint ventures. what about the talent here and Honda's plans for, I know that the job numbers were that Honda's actually going to add 1,000 jobs because of these new factories that have been announced. But what's the approach for making sure that the talent here is retrained or upskilled, and that the talent pipeline is established for the new facilities?
Yeah. Well, I would say, we're just in a few cases, we're looking at, companies that have the expertise from abroad. But for example, in terms of recycling, there's also, existing companies here that we're going to be talking to, obviously, and we know that we have a lot of mining companies that would be interested in participating. But in terms of, yes, it's 1,000 additional for the battery plant and the manufacturing plant. We believe that's a conservative number. Of course, you don't want to overpromise, under-deliver. There will be more, and of course, we haven't talked about the jobs coming from from our joint venture partners. But obviously, we need to transition 4,200 people to a new method over time, a new method of manufacturing, the new chemistries, the new processes. What's exciting to me is, the fact that Canada was selected also because of the track record that our associates have, and their ability to absorb new information, develop new expertise. But the exciting part for me is how Canada will play a role in transferring that knowledge to other Honda Genpos. We call them other Genpos, as other Honda companies across the world, because again, we will set the bar relative to manufacturing processes for EVs. And a lot of it is going to come from Canada and transferred abroad. So steep learning curve, but of course 4,200 people plus the 1,000 plus that we're going to be employing. It's not going to happen overnight. You got to remember, we have 2 plants that will continue to operate that are building Civic hybrids, CR-V hybrids into the future. It's going to be a gradual shift, but over time, 4,200 people plus 1,000 will need to transition to 100% to the either battery manufacturing or EV manufacturing.
That's interesting. You think that Canada is going to be the benchmark for
Honda, for sure.
Yeah, for talent.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the trust that the company has placed in the Canadian, our Canadian associate, our Canadian workers, and again, it's based on the track record. I mean, our plants in Allison are globally recognized for excellence, and as much as we say that dollars matter, of course they matter. But when you go down the list of consideration as to where things are going to happen, they become very important, right? About, do we believe that it's going to be, an easier transition with people that have a certain expertise and a track record for excellence? It certainly did in this case. And
I mean, I can't resist asking, because you brought up second use for batteries. I know that Honda's plans, globally at least, are to develop an energy management system.
Yes.
And that's a joint venture with Ford and BMW. Anything you can share on that and how that might relate to Canada?
Well, other than just talking about the objectives, obviously, that partnership aims to contribute to the stability of the grid, as things progress and more vehicles, and also not just the stability of the grid, but what benefits consumers can gain from that transaction. I think moving forward, what's important, and again, this is going to come maybe not next year, it'll take some time to develop, but the more you'll be able to focus people on energy management at home, all those components, I think the more critical it's going to become in terms of how much money they can save charging their vehicle, what's the optimal time, what can be sold to the grid, and what's the benefit that somebody can get from that. So it's playing in that arena. And I think it's going to become more and more important as more EVs, are introduced to the marketplace, and people are looking for those advantages, if you will, and maybe it's going to become a competitive factor as to which brand they're going to select. So that's what we're trying to achieve with this partnership. And again, as you may know, we have a partnership with 6 of our competitors on a charging infrastructure called Iona. Which is starting in the US. It is going to come to Canada, but the focus right now is the United States. They're going to have their first activity in the summer of 2024, is my understanding. But the whole purpose of this is to contribute to the charging infrastructure challenge, but at the same time raise the bar relative to accessibility, convenience, and reliability. I mean, the first picture that comes to mind is, how can we emulate the en route stations with all the amenities, and it's all about the customer experience that the two gentlemen you interviewed earlier kind of alluded to say, yeah, we need to get to that place where it becomes super convenient and it's just part of everybody's lives. So this is our contribution with 6 of our competitors to, again, hopefully raise that bar and for the future.
And we are going to have time for a couple questions at the end, so gather your thoughts. But one piece that I did want to touch on that I know is extremely important to the Canadian market is affordability of vehicles, and you mentioned in your speech. Could you expand on that at all? And how does Honda benchmark affordable? What will that look like?
Yeah. Well, lowering the cost from where they are today. How's that? But I think everything we're doing in terms of that vertically integrated, the proximity of the supply chain to the plant, all contributes to that. As opposed to having these pieces dispersed in different parts of the world. It requires a heavy investment up front, but I think there's something that's really going to pay off from that perspective later on. So I think I can summarize it by maybe creating that image that anything closer, you bring all the components, your supply chain closer to where things are manufactured, there's going to be some benefits to that will, again, lower the price of batteries and vehicles. Obviously, battery technology is another thing that's going to evolve and is evolving very quickly, and that's also going to contribute. I mean, the battery represents 40% of the cost of the vehicle. Obviously, anything you can do to reduce the, either through manufacturing processes, whether it be battery manufacturing or vehicle manufacturing, all will play into reducing the cost and making vehicles more affordable to the consumer. And I will say that if you have a plant that's built from the ground up to create those efficiencies that are focused solely on building EVs, you will get a tremendous amount of lift from that. And again, all contributing to affordability for consumers. And they need to be affordable. Remember, in 2030, 60% of what we sell will need to be electric. So, all the other things that I mentioned that need to come together, we control, obviously, the cost of those vehicles, the types of vehicles we bring to market. And, I'm very confident with what we're doing in Canada that it will contribute significantly to that, to that objective.
I want a number. Okay.
I'm not going to give you a number. We're not, but it's going to be significant.
All right. Any questions from the audience that we can get to? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for alluding to the circularity with respect to the batteries, because most emissions come from there. Where is Honda at with respect to circularity for the full cars, the tires, the upholstery, the powertrain, to reduce the extraction of virgin materials?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure that's a little far removed from my daily functions. All I can tell you that, Honda is very focused. If whatever activities are in place today, I'm not 100% sure, but where we are going in the future, we are looking at the entire vehicle, right? Again, by 2050, we said we want to be, zero emission from our vehicles and our operations across the world. That is a tall order, by the way, from where we are today and what currently exists. So I will say that, little by little, if the solutions are not there today, the commitment to get there is certainly in place. Okay?
Thank you. And yes, go ahead.
Hi, Ian McElravy from S&P Mobility. I'm just wondering your thoughts on the potential for BYD's entry to the Canadian market. Obviously, we're far away from any confirmation yet, but given all the investment your company's making and the sort of steps you're taking to try to get EVs lower in cost in the right way, if the government essentially decides we really want to hit these targets, we'll do anything that we have to do to do it, and bringing in these low-cost subsidized vehicles from China, is that a potential concern to you with this investment, or is it something you're not really thinking too much about?
Well, of course it's a concern to us. It's also a concern to the government. It should be, because again, we are partnering with the government. And what they're doing here, the investment is in the future of the Canadian economy, protecting the industry, expanding in this particular case. So there's a lot at stake also for the government in this. So we hope they make the right decisions and allow us again for all the things that I talked about in terms of being more competitive and advancing our technologies, a chance to flourish. So I would respond in that way.
Thank you. Anybody else? We have 30 seconds. Run to the mics. Okay. All right, go ahead.
I have one question for you. Could I ask you if you believe in the vehicle rebates? And if the answer is yes, will you be putting any pressure on the provincial government to change their direction in that?
Well, I asked the question to Premier Ford a couple of times, and he got upset at the federal government, was his response. So, listen, I think, one of the things I mentioned in my remarks is that I think it's critically important for those to stay in place in the short term, until such vehicles come to market that will consider to be affordable. I've heard many manufacturers saying, oh, they're going to be available next year or in the year after, and most of them have come back and say, not until the end of the end of the decade. So I think it's necessary for these incentives to stay in place, because what's in market right now, what's coming in the next few years, I kind of equated, are we going to be able to, bring a Civic customer today to make that transition to where the cost of EVs are today? That's going to be difficult without that support. And yet, what we're asked to sell in terms of mix is escalating very, very quickly towards 2030. So you need to marry these two things together, and that's why the conclusion is that, yes, it concerns us, for example, when Quebec is saying by 2027, we're phasing out our incentives. We think that it's going to be very difficult to achieve their more ambitious EV sales targets that they have. I think they want to achieve 85% by 2030, and it's an escalating, obviously, number year by year. So absolutely, we're going to continue to advocate for that. And now, what are the chances of success in Ontario? I'm not sure. All I know is Ontario is a very critical market for anybody operating in Canada. It represents close to 50% of our sales. So you do the math on that, it's going to be very important for us.
Thank you so much. Sorry we're out of time, I apologize, but thank you for the audience engagement. Really appreciate everyone asking such great questions. Thank you for being here, Jean-Marc. It's great to have you.
Thank you for your attention.